We've been talking together about how to build constructive conflict rather than destructive conflict. And the first point that we have is that Chris Argyris has taught us that you need to combine advocacy with inquiry. What we mean by this is that advocacy is me saying my opinion, me saying what I think. Inquiry is me inviting somebody else to speak. And so I need to combine my speaking with an invitation for somebody else to speak. And at this moment, I think it's really helpful to introduce an analogy that we'll use often when we talk about conflict. Have you ever seen a pirate movie? Have you ever seen in any way two pirates having a sword fight in a movie? It appears that there's only one way for pirates to fight, or only one way for there to be a sword fight. And you've all seen it. And what it is that somebody is advancing and somebody is retreating. That if you and I are having a sword fight, then I've got my sword and I'm taking steps forward and you're taking steps back. And then there's this great reversal. And then you are advancing and I'm retreating. But the only way that a sword fight happens is that one person's advancing and one person's retreating. I want you to think about any kind of conflict, any kind of thing where two people or groups are having any kind of dispute. Think of that like that bad pirate movie sword fight. Because here's what's happening, is that anybody in that experience, let's say if you and I are having some kind of a dispute, that it's experienced like that sword fight. And it's experienced that one person is advancing and one person's retreating. And how do you know who's advancing and who's retreating? Whoever is speaking is the one that is advancing. Now, you could be speaking in such a way that you weren't trying to attack somebody, but the way conflict plays out in our world, that you could not be intending to attack, but the person that's hearing it would experience it as in a way that made them defensive. So what we've got is a situation where if I speak, no matter what I say, I am making you defensive. So what do? Do I just agree not to speak? That won't work. I have to figure out a way to speak in such a way that I'm handing the sword over to you. And what I do is I use Argyris's notion of combined advocacy with inquiry. And what I do is also, we've talked in a different setting about how important it is to negotiate a process and not just about the content. So what I'll do is that if you and I are having a dispute, I'll say, it's really important to me that we understand each other and we come to some kind of a mutual agreement. And obviously you're going to have to talk about what you think's right, I'm going to have to talk about what I think, and we're going to have to come together. And it would be very easy for us to go back and forth. I don't want to do that. Can we just agree that what we're going to do is you get to talk as long as you need to, and then I'll tell you what I think. I'll tell you what I think you're saying. And you'll tell me whether I got that right. And we'll just keep going back and forth with me making sure that I've understood you until you agree that I have understood you. And then it will be my turn to talk about what I think. But it's so important for me to understand you on your terms that we will start by just going as long as it takes until I've really understood you. And I will do this with somebody again and again. My world record for as long as it took for one side to feel understood is 9 months. Now, this was a special case. What had happened is that I had been invited is the wrong term. My president volunteered me. I was at a different seminary, I was at a Methodist school at the time. My president volunteered me to negotiate between the liberals and the conservatives who disagreed on the issue of homosexuality. And so the denomination was having a terrible problem. He said, "Oh yeah, I got a professor who knows about that kind of thing. And there's a board member who knows about that. Yeah, they'll solve that for you." And he comes to me and says, "You got a meeting." So I've got a 90-minute meeting to solve homosexuality in the Methodist Church. How's that going to go for me? So what they did is they invited 5 or 6 of extreme liberals, 5 or 6 extreme conservatives, and 5 or 6 people in the middle to come for a meeting. And the way that this was said is that we're going to come to a meeting, there will be a mediator there, and that we will come up with some solution. Like one meeting's going to do it. So Sharon's the board member who was working with me on this. We agreed that what our only goal from the first meeting is to have a second meeting, to get them to the point where they would just keep listening to each other. And so we created a bunch of different exercises that were designed to get them to listen to each other. And there was three sides to this: the liberals, the conservatives, and the ones in the middle. And what we discovered is early on that the leaders of the factions were actually open to some kind of negotiation. But then there were rank and file soldiers that were there who, every time the leader would take a step towards the middle to try and do something that was a compromise, the soldiers would go up in arms and they would say, oh, no, we can't let that happen. And it would go back and forth. Well, we kept trying to make sure they understood each other. And about 9 months into the process, we'd be meeting once a month, we broke the group into two groups with the entire scientific method of everybody whose birthday's in the first half of the year, you go with Scott. Everybody whose birthday's in the second half of the year, you go with Sharon. And fine. We get there, and I look around the room, and we have all the leaders in the room and none of the rank and file. So this is a moment where the leaders can take a step without being pulled back by their rank and file. So I asked the first group to speak, I asked the people in the middle why they were so upset about this issue. And they talked about how they have all these other missional concerns about evangelism and church growth and about social justice, and that all of them were being derailed by the fact that every conversation where they got together was on homosexuality. And the two extremes on this ended up trying to argue against that. But what they accidentally did is they had to make common cause with each other in order to fend off the people in the middle. And they were accidentally validating each other's points because they had now listened to each other long enough. Well, in this moment, our 45 minutes or hour that we were in a group would come to an end, and I just keep going. And finally, we're like 15 minutes overtime, and Sharon knocks on the door, and I open the door, and all I say is stall, and I close the door quickly. Because I knew that we were making headway. And what happened is that we came out of that room with a proposal that said that the liberals, the conservatives, and the people in the middle had all agreed to bring back to their denomination two things. They wanted to propose a 2-year moratorium on any kind of proposals or any kind of votes about how to deal with homosexuality. And then the second is that they were going to propose a 2-year listening and teaching process that the extreme liberals and extreme conservatives would run together. They had now built up enough trust that they would be willing to work together to go from place to place with a little roadshow where they were doing the training or the teaching on this. What's important here? The process allowed them to listen to each other long enough that each side felt understood by the other. By combining advocacy with inquiry, by taking the sword out of somebody's hand and handing it to them and saying, I will let you speak as long as you need to speak until it's my turn to listen. By doing that, you can take the tension out of the room and stop it from being a competition and start it to be an agreement where we're going to work together to a solution. Combine advocacy with inquiry.